First of all, what rhabdomyolysis is actually. Please welcome Professor Dr. Wolfgang Kemmler. Well, hello. Nice to see you. We have a challenging and critical topic to address. After all of the praise for EMS, we're taking a critical look now. The so-called rhabdomyolysis, muscle disintegration due to high mechanical stress. And this is a fact with EMS. But what is true about this? You will remember 3 or 4 years ago, we had a Spiegel Online feature, dangerous currents. We thought that this was actually addressed with the Leitlinien by Professor Fröhlich and some other guidelines. And we covered this topic, addressed this problem, and we would not have dreamed that the CK story actually boils up again. Just recently, we received a expert opinion of the Institute for Physical Medicine, and there was a build report, very, very negative, and I was really annoyed. A high danger potential. But let's not talk about effectiveness. Everyone knows about it, as Hans Klein already says, and I will actually say it tomorrow again. But today I want to really... So my focal themes are the danger potential of whole body EMS, rhabdomyolysis, then weakness and vertigo, then the so-called adverse effects in clinical studies. What have we seen so far in clinical studies? In a protected environment, have we ever come across negative effects? And finally, what about the risk of a long-term application of whole body EMS? Nobody has looked at this before, as far as I know. Then, of course, safety aspects and recommendations conclude my presentation. And, of course, the guidelines, the Leitlinien. Rhabdomyolysis. This is a mechanically induced muscle decomposition. In literature, we always mention very high hemoglobin values, CK. This is basically the trigger of rhabdomyolysis. This is a very old article published by Spiegel Online magazine. And this rhabdomyolysis is found after initial EMS, whole body EMS application, not in session 10 or 15, but always usually after session number 1. This rhabdomyolysis, you can imagine the muscle is damaged, substances in the interior of the muscle are actually entering the lymphatic system, the blood vessels, and this can, of course, produce negative effects, may cause disorders, diseases in the liver, renal disorders, and even cardiac effects through electrolyte issue. So this is a serious topic that needs to be addressed. It is really critical, and you have to stay on the ball. But I'll talk about this a little later. Here, an overview. This is unfortunately a little small print for you on all of the publications available in this area. 7 authors in total have actually issued publications. It's usually single case studies with individual sports people in most cases, as we can see here in the initial session in a trial training or in the first session with the sports person. And here are the values. Just to give you a feel for the danger potential. A CK value, a normal value would be 200 international units, 200. This would be the resting value, the basal value of creatine kinase. And here we're looking at the values after whole body EMS application. 5,400, okay, this is clearly higher, but this can be topped. The CK of 86,000, 71,000 here, 240,000 CK. this is a factor of 1,000. This is, of course, not beneficial for a human body. But this is all individual cases. And it can be expected that they did not measure the values when they were the highest on day 3 or 4. So it could well be that after the training, right away, those values were even higher. The highest ever reported value after 100 kilometers cross running stood at 300,000, approximately 300,000. So we're approaching these extreme values, which is not desirable. Here, two own studies with a big group of people. Of 20, and we actually applied a very, very high extortion EMS training, and on average 29,000 CK. The peak value were 124,000. Quite interesting. Another study regarding regeneration. Of course, we had to have sore muscles before the regeneration phase. And we only had them in 3 places, in the calf, in the thigh, and nevertheless we have values of 99,000 of CK. In summary, this means for us, without any excuses, no excuses made, whole body EMS is particularly suitable to induce rhabdomyolysis. There is no other type of training to produce the same high amount of CK. Why? Because all big muscle groups are stimulated at the same time with a supramaximal intensity, if you so want to say so. This is really hard to reproduce in any other way. So it is really self-evident that EMS, whole body EMS, can cause rhabdomyolysis. The question is, does this have clinical consequences for the patient? Is it only high CK value, or are there any clinical consequences? So this was the status quo for our study. So do these high CK values really occur, or do we only find them at the lab? So what about the initial training with full extortion? And the second question is, does this really have a relevance for patients' health? And what about people who undergo the training for weeks on weeks? Do these CK values come down? And to which extent do they come down? So these are the clinically relevant questions. Again, the basics, below 100, that's easy to remember. And the resting value, myoglobin. So by with a rhabdomyolysis, with a mild one, the factor is 10. Then 11 to 50 times is a moderate rhabdomyolysis, and over 50 times the resting value of CK, you suffer a severe rhabdomyolysis. People would actually have to have a dialysis, renal dialysis in this particular case. So we took 27 people, male and female, aged 24 to 50 years, with long-standing strength training experience, but without any whole-body EMS experience. And we did a classical full extortion whole-body EMS application, bipolar, 85 hertz, 350 milliseconds, rectangular, intermittent, and we can see the blood values, how they developed over time. Of course, after a positive vote of the ethical commission, this was, of course, done under close medical surveillance. Rhabdomyolysis, inducing rhabdomyolysis is not fun. But these are the results. These are the units. We know 200 is the resting value amount. This is the CK value before the training, and the value right after the EMS application, and then measured again 3 to 4 days afterwards, and the peak value for the whole period. So this is the minimum and the maximum of the same person. So this is the person with the lowest CK value, and this is the person with the highest CK value. And this is the average for the 27 people. The maximum we found was 143,000. So when you actually do a full extortion whole body EMS application, then you can generate very high CK values. Not necessarily so. The same person, same EMS application, and the values were very low. So there is a huge individual spread in the CK values. Some react very harshly, others don't. And you don't know that. You can't see it from the outside. And so be careful. You can see whether a person is producing a high CK value. You don't know that. So try to approach it carefully. So the average value was 26,000. Just by comparison, this was there was a marathon in Fürth at the same time, and the peak was 10 times lower. But 24 hours post, you can see the sore muscles, which only occurs on day 3 or 4. This is the classical sore muscle. Painful, definitely, too. But this means the CK values are very high for some who undergo whole body EMS training. So for an eccentric strength training, this would be normal. So 113 factor increase, 40 times higher myoglobin. And this is the cause for acute renal failure. They are bigger molecules that actually close up the renal tubuli. But there's no cardiac risk. There's no colored urine. We couldn't detect any blood in the urine. And all of the renal values, creatine, for instance, it's the globular filtration rate. So this is a typo. Everything is above 60, so no problem for the kidneys. But interesting to note, in summary, so there's no clinical relevance. Very high CK valence, but most of them have no clinical relevance. But these were all well-trained healthy persons. And they had no adverse side effects. Nobody actually were addicted. They were all prepared for this EMS section. They all had enough food and beverage intake, liquid intake. This is really key. And it was under strict medical control. This may, of course, look completely different with patients or people who actually have a disorder or who are simply very old. We predominantly work with people aged 60 plus, so you need to be particularly careful. And you can't actually think here high CK values, no clinical relevance. For older people, this can be completely different. Because this is our audience. Young people can also do HIT training, but older people have to rely on EMS. We trained for 10 weeks, had high myoglobin and CK values. The same group actually trained for 10 weeks, once a week, the usual thing, without any extortion. And here you can see the results after 10 weeks. Again, a full extortion whole body EMS training session, and all of a sudden, the values are 30 times lower. This is the repeated boot effect. This is what the US people say. So through the conditioning, I produce an effect because the CK values come down. So even after a conditioning phase, if I do a full extortion training, which I shouldn't do, and we all agree on this, even if I did undergo such a whole body EMS application, you would reach the values of eccentric strength training, so in a safe CK area. So the message is very clear. Ramp it up slowly, condition the people gradually, and after the 10th time, you can really jerk up the frequency. Next story, and you've probably come across this as well in your studio operation, in your club operation, weakness and vertigo. The EMS application, the EMS, whole body EMS, involving all major muscle groups with a 2,800 to 3,000 square centimeters. You should think that there is a huge metabolism. Unfortunately, we couldn't measure this because we only measure the exhaled gases. And this is like with strength training. It actually passes by the mitochondria because it's anaerobic. So the results cannot be really measured by exhaled gases. So the difference would be 20 kilocalories at the end of the exercise, whether you apply EMS or not. Everyone who's ever undergone an EMS training knows that we burn calories. But what about the so-called epoch? This is the expenditure of the post-treatment oxygen consumption. So I've done whole body EMS or strength training, and what is my energy consumption after the training? And you can see this here. This group did EMS. This was the measurement before. One group was accompanied through this period of time, 3-4 days afterwards, and this group had an EMS stress, not fully extorted, but quite intensive. And here you can see the difference in the energy consumption or the energy expenditure. And you can see that this energy expenditure only actually reaches the standard basal expenditure rate after 72 hours. And this is why you actually reduce abdominal body fat, and that is really relevant. I don't want to dwell on this any further. At the end of the day, it is EMS training actually consumes a lot of energy. So you have to point out to the participants that they come well prepared. They should have eaten something. They should drink enough because of the renal stress. So important points to make to the people that undergo a session. So what popped up in all of these studies? You won't be able to read it, makes no difference. Heinz Klein studies works with sports people. They're different, but we're focusing on health here. It's the normal people that you have in your fitness club, in your EMS lounge. Every line represents one study, and we had roughly 15 studies, and we wanted to find about side effects, any fatalities, any side effects, any injuries. No undesirable side effects were reported, no weaknesses, no post-EMS vertigo or anything like it. We take this very seriously. We would never say, well, somebody actually fainted, but I wouldn't include it because it was post-EMS. No. Fact is that never, ever we have seen an undesirable side effect. It may well be that one or two participants say, I don't like this tingling feel in my skin. Fine. But once you've actually won over these people, most people stay 16 weeks a year, then you can't detect any undesirable side effects. And I think this is a consolation for you, and it's a positive message for you, I think. Let's continue. A big topic, hot issue that has not been approached yet but should be. What about the undesirable effects of long-term whole-body EMS application? I think that in your lounges, there are people who've been doing this for 3 or 4 or 5 years. When did this start? In 2007? So say 8 or 9 years. So there can be people who've done this training for 10 years. Any negative effects that can be expected? Nobody has looked at this yet. This should be done. The longest study lasted for 1 year, but we should be measuring this for 8 or 9 years. So we have, as researchers, to actually try and get medium-term studies. And I don't know of any studies that has looked at a local EMS application for 10 years, maybe periodically with sports people, but not continuously with normal people. People ask me, I've been doing EMS for 5 years, any side effects I have to expect? Probably not, like with strength training. So hemoglobin or myoglobin and the CK values don't suggest this. Substances related with the immunological systems. But when you don't study it, you don't know for sure. Again, let me warn you, this actually plopped up lately. It's time to regulate the use of whole-body electrical stimulation. This is high-ranking colleagues, and they're serious about it. And this Professor Melnick comes from Israel. And you probably know that EMS is already regulated in Israel. Only master trainers can apply EMS. It's probably one-to-one training. And we don't have that, do we? So we have to really work hard to avoid this state regulation, because they always go for the safest way. Regulation is fine, but this regulation should be triggered by us instead of a regulatory framework that will be draconic. So we try to counteract this with our guidelines, the Leitlinien. I think it is important to apply some common sense and follow some guidelines. As Dr. Kleinöd already said, I don't want to repeat him, it is really important to regulate yourselves, to not go full throttle in the first session. It's about common sense. Strength training, eccentric strength training, you wouldn't go at full load either. So watch out. Apply some common sense. I think the guideline makes sense. You can actually download it from the internet, and then I think we can actually live with this, the whole body EMS world, the community. And this is what we would like to achieve with our roundtable, our EMS roundtable. Fine. Again, I can only encourage all of you to follow the framework, especially for the initial training. Please use mechanisms or make sure that you've got a personal trainer to avoid overexertion during the first few trainings. This is not only important for safety reasons, but also for efficiency reasons. For sports people, it may look different, but for older people, we need supervision. I've reached the end of my time slot. In these questions, we are not subject to a conflict of interest because we're not working for any companies. Thanks very much for your interest.